the heart of a lush green valley lay the peaceful village of Ekena, known for its calm and serene environment. The villagers lived in harmony, their days filled with laughter, and their evening with warmth of communal fires. The sounds of children playing, farmers working, and women singing as they cooked filled the air. One warm evening, as the sun began to set, casting an orange glow over the village, a stranger arrived. She was a fat black woman, dressed in a bright flowing dress that billowed around her as she walked. Her face was stern, her eyes sharp, and she carried an air of mystery that immediately caught the villagers' attention. "Who is she?" whispered Ada, a young girl, to her friend Amaka, as they watched the woman from a distance. "I don't know," replied Amaka, her eyes wide with curiosity. "But she looks different. I have never seen her before." The woman settled in a small abandoned hut on the outskirts of the village. She did not speak to anyone, nor did she ask for help. She simply moved in, unpacked her belongings, and shut the door. The villagers, known for their hospitality, were taken aback by her aloofness. "Good evening, ma," greeted Nneka, the village midwife, as she approached the hut the morning. "Welcome to Ekana. Do you need any help?" The woman glanced at Nneka, but said nothing. She simply shook her head and went back inside, leaving Nneka standing there puzzled. Days turned into weeks, and the woman remained a mystery. She was seen early in the morning, fetching water from the stream, and late at night, tending to a small garden she had planted behind her hut. But she spoke to no one and participated in none of the village activities. "I wonder why she doesn't speak to anyone," mused Chief Obinna during a village meeting. "Is unlike anyone we have ever had in Ekana. Maybe she has a dark past," suggested Uche, a farmer, "or perhaps she's just shy." Rumors began to spread. Some said she was a witch. Others thought she was mourning the loss of her family. But no one knew for sure. The children were both scared and intrigued, often daring each other to go near her hut. Early one morning, Oluchi decided to cook a large pot of her special stew. The rich aroma of the spices and herbs filled her small hut and soon spread throughout the village. The villagers, drawn by the mouth-watering smell, began to wonder what Oluchi was up to. "Do you smell that?" asked Amaka, pausing her chores and taking a deep breath. "Yes," replied Ada, her eyes wide with curiosity. "I wonder what she's cooking." Later that day, Oluchi made her way to the village market, carrying several pots of her stew. She set up a small stall and began ladling out portions into bowls. Initially, a few villagers approached her stall, hesitant but intrigued by the delicious smell. "Good day, ma," said Nneka, eyeing the steaming pot. "What are you selling?" "It is stew," replied Oluchi, with a small smile. "Would you like to try some?" Nneka nodded, and Oluchi handed her a bowl. As soon as Nneka took the first bite, her eyes lit up with delight. "This is amazing. Everyone, come and taste for yourself." Words quickly spread across the village, and soon a large crowd gathered around Oluchi's stall. People were jostling and pushing, eager to get a taste of the mysterious woman's stew. The line grew longer and longer, with villagers impatiently waiting for their turn. A strange woman who has just arrived at a land suddenly starts selling extraordinarily. What could possibly be wrong? The villagers couldn't get enough of her delicious stew, and they kept coming for more. The market buzzed with excitement, and soon people were fighting to get in front of the line. Despite the chaos, Oluchi remained calm, serving each customer with a gentle smile. By the end of the day, every pot was empty, and the villagers were amazed and satisfied. As the sun set and the market began to clear, Oluchi packed up her store and headed back to her hut. The villagers were still talking about her stew, their taste bud enchanted by the flavors. Oluchi had made her mark in the village of Ekana, and the mystery surrounding her only deepened. Who is this woman? Murmured Ada to Amaka as they walked home. And how does she make such magical food? I don't know, replied Amaka, her mind racing with question. But I hope she cooks again soon. The next day, the market was abuzz with talk of Oluchi stew. The other food sellers who had watched in disbelief as their regular customers flocked to their store, gathered early in the morning, whispered and casting suspicious glances in her direction. This is impossible, muttered Mama Chinyere, a seasoned food vendor. How can someone new so well sell on the first day? I lost all my customer yesterday, grumbled Papa Eze, stirring a pot of soup. They all went to her. Mama Nkechi, who sold jollof rice, nodded in agreement. There must be something in the food. It is not natural. As Oluchi arrived at the market with her pots of stew, the other vendors watched her closely. They noticed how quickly the villagers gathered around her store, eagerly waiting for their share. It is happening again, no, said Mama Chinyere, frustrated, evident in her voice. What are we going to do? We can't let her ruin our businesses, Papa Eze replied. We need to find out her secret. Mama Nkechi approached Oluchi's store, feigning friendliness. Good morning, Oluchi, she said with a forced smile. Your stew was quite popular yesterday. What's your secret? Oluchi looked at Mama Nkechi with a mixture of dread and anger, but she managed to keep cool. Mama Nkechi narrowed her eyes. Are you sure there's nothing else? No special spices or herbs? Oluchi shook her head. No, Oluchi replied coolly. Unsatisfied with the answer, Mama Nkechi returned to the other vendors. She's hiding something, she whispered. We need to keep an eye on her. The food vendors decided to band together, determined to uncover the truth. They watched Oluchi's every move, hoping to catch a glimpse of her secret ingredient or technique. But no matter how hard they tried, they found nothing out of the ordinary. Or maybe she's just using juju, Mama Chinyere said, her voice low. We should be very careful. Despite their suspicion, the vendors couldn't deny the impact Oluchi was having on the market. Their sales continued to drop more and more as more villagers chose her stew over their offerings. The frustration grew and tension rose among the once harmonious community. Every day, Oluchi, now fondly called Madam Cook, continued to bring her delectable stew to the market. The villagers eagerly awaited her arrival, forming long lines even before she set up her store. Her fame has spread beyond Ekana, attracting customers from neighboring villages who came to taste the magical stew everyone was talking about. Good morning, Madam Cook, greeted Nneka, one of her regular customers. With a bright smile, I brought my sister from the next village to taste your stew. Good morning, Nneka, Oluchi replied, serving a generous portion of stew. I'm glad you could bring her. Enjoy. The market buzzed with excitement as more and more crowd around her store. The other vendors watched as envy entered their heart as their store remained ignored. She's selling out every day, said Mama Chinyere, shaking her head. I don't understand it all. People are coming all over just for her food. Papa Eze added, frustration evident in his voice. What makes her stew so special? As the days went on, the influx of customers grew. The villagers of Ekana took pride in Madam Cook, but the other vendors were left struggling to keep their businesses afloat. She tried to replicate her stew using similar ingredients and techniques, but none of them could capture the unique flavor of Oluchi's cooking. She must be doing something we can't see, muttered Mama Nkechi, stirring her pot of jollof. It is not just about the ingredients. Despite the growing tension among vendors, Oluchi remained oblivious to their discontent. He continued to cook with the same love and care, greeting each customer with a warm smile and a kind word. Your stew is the best I have tasted, said a man from a neighboring village, handing Oluchi a few coins. I have traveled far just to buy it. Thank you, Oluchi replied, her heart swelling with gratitude. I'm happy you enjoyed it. As Oluchi packed up her store, at the end of the day, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Her pots were empty, and her customers were satisfied, while the villagers of Ekana and beyond marveled at Madam's cook delicious stew. None suspected the dark secret behind her extraordinary success. Unknown to everyone, Oluchi's stew contained a secret ingredient that she kept hidden from the world. Each morning before heading to the market, Oluchi followed a peculiar ritual. When she felt the urge to urinate, she would do it in a small container. The container held the secret to her charm. Her own urine. She would later use this liquid in the preparation of her famous stew. One evening, after another day of selling out her stew, Oluchi sat in her small hut, reflecting on her success. She smiled to herself, knowing that her secret was safe. If only they knew, she murmured, shaking her head. But they will never find out. The next morning, Oluchi went about her usual routine. She collected her urine in the container and carefully set it aside. She then began preparing her stew, mixing the usual ingredient with the secret liquid. As the aroma of her cooking filled the air, Oluchi hummed a tune. She knew that the villagers would soon be lining up in her store, eager for a taste of her magical stew. As the crowd was already gathering. Nneka, one of Oluchi's regular customers, chatted with a friend while they waited. Have you ever tasted anything like her stew? Nneka asked, licking her lips in anticipation. Never, her friend replied. I wonder what her secret is. As Oluchi set up her store, the other vendors watched her closely, trying to uncover her secret. Mama Chinyere and Papa Eze exchanged glances, frustration etched on their faces. We need to find out what she's doing, oh, Mama Chinyere whispered to Papa Eze. It is driving me crazy. Papa Eze nodded. I know, but we have to be very careful. If she finds out that we are watching her, she will even be more secretive. Despite their efforts, the vendors couldn't get close to see Oluchi's preparation. She worked quickly and efficiently, serving bowl after bowl to her eager customers. As the day wore out, the crowd at Oluchi's store grew larger. People from neighboring villages continued to pour in, all wanting to taste of her famous stew. The other vendors could only watch in dismay. There's something not right, Mama Nkechi muttered to herself, stirring her pot of jollof again. We need to find what is it. As the sun began to set, the market started to clear. Oluchi packed up her store and headed home. She felt a sense of satisfaction, knowing that her secret remained undisclosed. Back in her hut, Oluchi carefully cleaned her cooking utensils and prepared for the next day's market. She glanced at the container of the urine and smiled to herself. Tomorrow will be another successful day, she said softly, her eyes gleaming with determination. Every morning at precisely 9 a.m., Madam Cook will arrive at the market, pushing her cart laden with streams of pots of stew. By then, a long eager of customers would already be waiting for her, chatting excitedly among themselves. Here she comes, shouted Nneka, pointing at Oluchi's approach. I can't wait to get my hands on the stew. Me too, replied Chika, her friend. It is worth the wait. Oluchi will greet her customers with warm smile, set up her store with practiced efficiency. She began serving bowl after bowl of her famous stew. At 12 noon, Oluchi followed her usual routine. She closed her store temporarily, more to the disappointment of her waiting customers. Why does she always close her store at noon? Wondered Uche, a regular customer. But she always comes back with that black container. While the villagers speculated, Oluchi disappeared into a narrow alleyway behind the market. She carried with her a small black container, her secret companion. For the next 15 minutes, she will be out of sight, leaving her customer curious and impatient. Do you think that the container has something to do with the stew? Asked Mama Nkechi, whispering to Mama Chinyere. It must, replied Mama Chinyere. But what could it be? We need to find out. Oluchi returned to her store exactly 15 minutes later. As always, the black container was now carefully hidden beneath the cart. She resumed serving her stew, the line of customers quickly reforming. As the day grew to a close, Oluchi packed up her store. Her secret still safe. She walked home, the black container intact, confident that no one could ever discover the real ingredient behind her extraordinary stew. Every time Madam Cook returned to her store with the black container, she followed a peculiar routine. She would carefully open the container and pour its contents into her stew, stirring it thoroughly. Her customers, unaware of the secret ingredient, continued to line up eagerly for a taste of her magical stew. "Look at her," Mama Nkechi whispered to Mama Chinyere, watching Oluchi from a distance. "She does this every day at noon." "I know," Mama Chinyere replied. "There is something in that container that makes her stew special. We need to find out what it is." The other food vendors grew increasingly furious and frustrated. They couldn't understand why Oluchi always left her store at exactly 12 noon and how she managed to attract so many customers. Despite their best efforts, they couldn't replicate her success. One afternoon, Mrs. Clara, a determined and brave cook, decided to uncover the truth about Madame Cook's mysterious routine. She decided to make the worst decision of her life by trailing Mama Cook. At exactly 12 noon, Oluchi closed her store and headed off as usual, carrying a black container. Mrs. Clara discreetly followed, keeping a safe distance so as not to be noticed. She moved quietly and quickly, her heart pounding with anticipation. As Oluchi wandered through the market into the narrow alleyway, Mrs. Clara followed and stayed her trade. She watched as Oluchi walked confidently, seemingly unaware of the eyes following her. The path led them away from the busy market and towards the outskirts of the village. Oluchi approached a small modest house at the edge of the village. Mrs. Clara's eyes widened as she realized this was Madame Cook's home. Madame Cook arrived home, her steps heavy with satisfaction from a successful day at the market. She carried the black container carefully, as if it was precious. Mrs. Clara, having followed her discreetly, watched from a distance, trying to remain unseen. Oluchi entered the house and went straight to the back door leading to the backyard. She walked with purpose, oblivious of Mrs. Clara's quiet approach behind her. Mrs. Clara kept a safe distance, her eyes focused on the black container Oluchi was holding. As Oluchi reached the backyard, she placed the container on a small table near a garden shade. She looked around, seemingly to ensure she was alone. Mrs. Clara, hidden behind a large bush, held her breath and started peeping at her. Oluchi unfastened her clothing and squatted over the container. The sound of her urination hitting the container was faint but clear to Mrs. Clara. She could barely contain her shock as she watched the dark liquid fill the container. "This can't be real," Mrs. Clara thought, her heart racing. She struggled to stay hidden, her mind reeling from the revelation. Just as Oluchi was about to stand up and close the container, she glanced around and her eyes widened as they locked onto Mrs. Clara, who had mistakenly made a small noise. A tense silence filled the air. "What are you doing here?" Oluchi's voice was sharp, her eyes and gaze narrowing with suspicion. "How dare you intrude?" Mrs. Clara stepped out from behind the bush, her face pale but resolute. "I followed you," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I needed to know the truth." "The truth?" Oluchi's eyes flashed with anger. "You are where you don't belong. This is none of your business." "I saw what you just did," Mrs. Clara said, her voice gaining strength despite her fear. "Using your own urine in the food? This is wrong. The villagers deserve to know." Oluchi's expression hardened. "You have seen too much," she said, her tone cold and threatening. "If you tell anyone about this, you will face consequences." "I am not afraid of you," Mrs. Clara replied her, determination unwavering. "People have the right to know the truth. Your secret ends here." Mrs. Clara turned to flee from Madame Cook's backyard, her heart racing with fear. But before she could take more than a few steps, she heard Madame Cook chilling laughter behind her. It was a high, unsettling sound that seemed to pierce the calm afternoon air. "What is happening?" Mrs. Clara whispered to herself, trying to move faster, but her legs felt suddenly heavy, as if they were being pulled down by an unseen force. As Madame Cook's laughter grew louder, Mrs. Clara's vision began to blur. She staggered, her strength draining away. With a desperate cry, Mrs. Clara collapsed on the ground and died on the spot. Madam Cook approached her, her expression cold and unfeeling. "Such a shame," she said softly, her voice dripping with disdain. "You should have stayed away. What a waste," Oluchi muttered as she pulled Mrs. Clara inside her home. She maneuvered her body in a dark corner of the kitchen, out of the sight from any casual observer. Your curiosity led you to an unfortunate end. Once Mrs. Clara's body was hidden away, Oluchi stepped back and took a moment to survey the scene. Satisfied that there was no immediate evidence of her dark deeds, she turned to leave. She straightened her clothes and composed herself before heading back to her store. As she walked, she couldn't help but feel a twisted sense of satisfaction. No one will dare question me again, she thought, a cold smile on her lips. Back at the market, Oluchi resumed her routine. With her usual charm and efficiency, the villagers, oblivious to the events of the afternoon, continued to queue for her food, eager for the taste that had become so mysteriously irresistible. Days passed, and the absence of Mrs. Clara grew increasingly noticeable among the food vendors. The market was quieter, with few vendors and a sense of unease hanging on the air. The other food sellers, deeply worried, discussed the situation in hushed tones. "I haven't seen Clara in days," said one seller, frowning, as she looked around at the empty space where Clara's store used to be. "She wouldn't just disappear like that." Another seller nodded in agreement. "It is not like her to be gone for so long without a word. Something must be wrong." Determined to find out what had happened, they approached Madam Cook's store. Oluchi was busy serving customers, her demeanor calm and decomposed. "Have you seen Clara?" one of the sellers asked, her tone urgent. "She hasn't been around for 3 days." Oluchi looked up, her face a mask of innocence. "Clara? I haven't seen her for a while," she replied, her voice smooth and untroubled. "I'm afraid I don't know where she is." The seller exchanged worried glances. "That's strange," one said. "She was always here, and now she just disappeared without a trace." As the conversation ended, the seller walked away, still uneasy, but with no answers. The market continued as usual, though the missing Clara cast a shadow over the vendors. One afternoon, a pastor arrived in town. He was weary and hungry from his travel, and his stomach growled with a deep rumbling hunger. Spotting Madam Cook's store, he made his way over, eager for a meal. "Excuse me," the pastor said, approaching Oluchi with a kind smile. "I have heard you make wonderful food. Could I please have a meal?" Oluchi greeted him with her usual warm smile. "Of course, Reverend," she said. "I'll be delighted to serve you. What will you like?" The pastor ordered a hearty meal and took a seat at one of the nearby benches. As Madam Cook prepared to serve the pastor, she noticed something that made her frown. The pastor had a Bible in his hand, a symbol of his faith that immediately set off a warning bell in Oluchi's mind. She tried to push her unease aside, focusing instead on the task at hand. The pastor paid for his meal and sat on the bench, waiting patiently. Oluchi placed the food in front of him with a practiced smile. "Here you go, Reverend. I hope you enjoy your meal." The pastor took a bite, but his expression quickly changed from pleasure to concern. He frowned, his face reflecting a deep unease. "Excuse me," he said, setting his fork down. "Could I ask you something?" Oluchi's smile faltered slightly, but she quickly masked her apprehension. "Of course, Reverend. What is on your mind?" The pastor reached out into his pocket and pulled out a small vial of anointing oil. He began to pray softly, his voice steady and calm. "Heavenly Father, I ask for your guidance and protection in this place. May your spirit reveal any hidden darkness." Oluchi's eyes widened with alarm. She had never encountered such a direct challenge before. "What are you doing?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The pastor looked at her with a piercing gaze. "I sense something is not right here," he said quietly. "Sometimes the Lord reveals things through his spirit. I must ensure that this food is safe and there are no hidden dangers." As he finished the prayer, he carefully brought out his anointing oil. With a steady hand, he poured a single drop of the oil onto the food, that Madam Cook had prepared. The moment the oil touched the food, a strange transformation occurred. The food began to glow with a strange supernatural light. The aroma changed, becoming more intoxicating and unsettling. The people who had been eagerly waiting to eat in line suddenly stopped, their expression shifting with anticipation to confusion. "What is happening?" one of the customers asked, his voice filled with alarm. He looked at the glowing food and then at Madam Cook, suspicious growing in her eyes. The pastor raised his voice, his tone commanding. "This food has been enchanted. It is not just food, it is charm. It has been used to control and deceive you all." The crowd gasped, their faces reflecting a mixture of shock and realization. The enchantment that had clouded their judgment seemed to lift, and they began to understand the gravity of the situation. "Is this true?" another customer demanded, staring at Madam Cook. "Have you been deceiving us?" Feeling the weight of the crowd's anger, Madam Cook's face turned pale. She tried to maintain her composure, but failed. "Yes, it is true," she confessed, her voice trembling. "I have been using my urine to make the food irresistible. And I killed Mrs. Clara." The confession sent a ripple of horror through the crowd. Clara's disappearance, once a mystery, was now linked to Madam Cook's dark practices. The anger of the people was palpable, and their murmurs turned into shouts. "How could you do this?" one of the sellers shouted. "You have been using us all along." The pastor stepped back, giving the crowd space to react. "This is a serious crime. You must make sure justice is served," he said, his voice solemn. Madam Cook's plea for mercy was drowned out by the rising fury of the crowd. "Please, I am sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she cried, but her words fell on deaf ears. The crowd surged forward, picking up stones and other makeshift weapons. "You need to pay for what you have done," someone shouted as they threw the first stone. Madam Cook stumbled and fell on the ground, but the crowd showed no mercy as Madam Cook was lynched instantly to death.